Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Wherever you're joining in from, hello. At the time I'm filming this, we are zooming towards the holiday season, which means we're also zooming towards the end of this year into winter quarter and all that comes along with it from a recruiting perspective. For many of you, autumn quarter is your biggest recruiting timeframe, and for many others of you, winter and spring will mark the peak of your recruiting efforts. So for those of you who have just hired, or for those of you who are about to hire, this webinar is truly for you. Today, we're going to cover the concept of equity in the workplace and how you can set up your hiring, onboarding, and retention processes in a way that will create success for all. Thank you so much for making an effort to be here and committing part of your day to professional development. I promise to make this next half hour or so very worth your time. Before we can get into anything, I invite you to read through the premise of today's training. We cannot talk through any content unless we assume the following 3 bullet points are true. I assume, as your host today, that you are here because your priority is to hire, onboard, and retain a more diverse workforce that feels welcomed, valued, and included. And because that you understand that existing practices in these 3 areas may exclude or disadvantage marginalized populations. In order to create lasting change, we must acknowledge that the process of creating that change is lasting as well, and will require the investment of significant time, energy, and resources. But that's okay, and your being here is a positive step that will certainly create impact. Today then, we'll talk through best practices and standards for hiring, onboarding, and retention that will guide you as you consider how you can improve upon these areas in ways that are unique to your company. I'll share the why behind why these current best practices exist to help magnify the importance of DEI work and provide credibility. And lastly, throughout this slide deck, you'll see several screenshots or links to different resources, and you're welcome to pause this presentation or come back to this slideshow at a later date to review these resources for examples as to how you can change your onboarding and retention practices for the better. Very quickly, let me lift the curtain and introduce myself. My name is Leah. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Employer Engagement and Communication Manager at the UW Career and Internship Center. If this is your first contact with the CNIC, hello. We are the centralized career center on campus, and we provide career guidance to students of almost all majors and school years. Everyone in our office works to connect students with a different thing or audience, so students with scholarships, mentorships, advising opportunities. I work to connect students with employers like yourself. So my role is focused mostly around outreach and event coordination, really any type of event or opportunity where employers and students can connect. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today. And I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the land on which I'm currently delivering this presentation is Coast Salish land, which has always been and will always be inhabited by Indigenous people of the Suquamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and Duwamish nations. Though our university stands on their land, and I, as a settled person, get to live and work and play on it, I'd like to thank these tribes and bands for their stewardship of the land and waters throughout history. And I'd encourage you to always consider how you walk and roam through places new and old. Before we can talk about how to create equity, I need everyone here to have a shared understanding of what equity means. It is not equality. To that, I'll turn to an illustration that I think shows this really well. Equality on the left-hand side of the page means I've given you all exactly the same tools to succeed. In this cartoon, you can see that everyone has the same size box, all given to help them peer over the fence to see the baseball game. But what if one person doesn't need that box? What if one person needs more boxes? You can see that that's the case in the left-hand side equality frame. We have one person who's pretty short, one person who's pretty tall, but in the equity frame to the right, we've given more boxes to the smaller person who needed them and no boxes to the taller person who didn't. All 3 people are now equally the same height, all able to see over the fence. And that's what we're trying to do when we talk about equity. It's not about equipping everyone with the same tools. It's about equipping people with the tools they need to have the same potential for success. Equality does not enable success, but equity inherently does. So with that definition in mind, then kind of guiding us through our presentation today, here is where we begin. So you've got a job opening and you need to find the right candidate to fill it. Let's discuss all the aspects of the hiring process, soup to nuts. In this section of the training, we'll cover position development and description writing, recruiting practices, application review, and interview protocols. So how do you develop a position and market it in an equitable way? It's a $1 million question, right? And it's nearly impossible to think about it through the lens of every single type of population. So my key takeaway from this slide for you is that you should distill your position down to that which is necessary for people to know. So this might be the position purpose, the function of the role to the business, and the skills needed to complete the role. You'll want to think through qualities that your ideal candidate possesses prior to posting the role. This helps you to create a scoring rubric, which I'll talk about later, and helps you to proactively eliminate bias. And lastly, think beyond what the employee might have actually accomplished during their time in school. Where they attended college, their major, and their GPA are not the sole indicators of knowledge. For those of you who are Suits fans like me, this isn't like an episode of Suits where you can only get hired if you went to Harvard, right? Columbia matters too. So I'll encourage you to think about your position description in 5 parts. These, number 1, introduce candidates to your organization. Number 2, the goal of the job as it relates to the success of your organization. And number 3, the function of your job. You can also include desired qualifications as number 4, and position benefits as number 5. And I'll add here that this is a really great time to emphasize any policies that your company might have in place or is working on putting into place that make your company more equitable. Many of you are probably wondering about ideals that are important to the current generation, so I've highlighted a few here of things that Gen Z really cares about. So things like social impact, salary transparency, hybrid work models, equal pay, etc. And I'll also encourage you to highlight features of the position as they relate to DEI or diversity and equity initiatives. For example, will this role require you to be knowledgeable about DEI work? And if this role doesn't necessarily relate to the DEI work of the department, does your organization still have a diversity statement or a commitment to DEI practices that the employee should know about upfront? Here's an example of a sample job description with a DEI commitment and some position responsibilities that are related to DEI work. I'll encourage you to pause the slideshow here so that you can read through this, or you can come back to the slide and read through it post-presentation. In sum, your job description should do the following 4 things. It should introduce candidates to the job and your organization, describe the position purpose and your organization's work towards equity and inclusion, clarify your must-have qualifications, not your nice-to-have qualifications, as well as skills that will be learned in the role, and you should use gender-neutral language throughout and review the description for any exclusive terms or verbiage. And if you're not familiar with gender-neutral language, I'd like to pull language from the European Parliament, which has an entire guidebook on this. They're much smarter than I am. And their guidebook states the following about gender-neutral language. Quote, it's the generic term covering the use of non-sexist language, inclusive language, or gender-fair language. The purpose of gender-neutral language is to avoid word choices which may be interpreted as biased, discriminatory, or demeaning by implying that one sex or social gender is the norm. Using gender-fair and inclusive language also helps reduce gender stereotyping, promote social change, and contributes to achieving gender equality. So this might look like replacing masculine words like confident, determined, and decisive with words like certain, steadfast, or conclusive. Or feminine words like supportive, cooperative, and understanding with gender-neutral phrases like helpful, partnership, and comprehension. And there's also some phrases here that I'll point out that are maybe even a little bit more familiar to you, like phrases like manning the front desk, or my job is going to help all of mankind, right? There are certainly some gender neutral phrases in there that we could replace. Okay, so you've got your job description all set. You're ready to toss it into the ether of the internet and attract some candidates. Let's talk about how you can make your recruiting practices more equitable. The key here is to widen your candidate pool. Does your company have a standard, maybe, of attending career fairs only at certain schools, or only posting your jobs to LinkedIn, or only recruiting heavily during certain seasons? If your answer to that rhetorical question is yes, all of those standards may be inequitable. Consider casting a wide net and even recruiting year-round to ensure a diverse candidate pool. And when you recruit year-round and have a wide net, you want to ensure that you don't fall into the trap of having a cookie cutter, copy-paste type of message, right? So you want to be intentional about the groups and the organizations that you contact regarding your positions and tailor your outreach to those communities and populations to explain why you're interested in that. Gen Z specifically wants to know, like, you feel like they'll be a good fit for you. But on the flip side of this, you don't want to tokenize diverse communities or only contact candidates because of their identities. To give you a good illustration of how you might consider going about this, you might want to avoid phrases like, quote, our organization is looking to hire Latin women for our internship. When you tell an underrepresented minority that you're messaging them because they're a minority, you offend and tokenize them. All new hires and candidates in the job pool prefer to be hired for their skills or expertise. So tell these populations why you're interested in talking with them from that perspective, and consider tailoring your messaging to show how you can support them in your workplace through mentors or a diverse leadership team or the value your organization puts on DEI work, etc. Candidates want to see that you value their unique experiences and know that they'll be supported with pathways for progression. There's a hyperlink on this slide that leads to a great resource written by the Handshake team that shares some good do's and don'ts to messaging underrepresented students. Note, this net can be virtual too. Consider virtual recruiting events like career fairs or info sessions to reach a diverse candidate pool. And if you're having a hard time championing DEI work in your own workplace, this type of data on this slide and this slide too can be a really powerful tool in showcasing the importance of casting a wide net. And Handshake offers a lot of data like this in their Handshake Network Trends Report, which is bolded at the bottom left of this slide. And I'd implore you to research that for more information just like this. So you've got some candidates and some applications to review. What now? The main thing to keep in mind here is bias. We are a biased people, and we all have work to do when it comes to eliminating our own personal biases. So when hiring, rubrics can help maintain a level of neutrality. I told you I was going to come back to that. Rubrics can help you assign numbers to score a candidate's aptitude for a job. And when building your rubric, you'll want to build in an element of add versus fit. Qualifications that can be assessed from the perspective of what the candidate is adding to your company, not how they fit in with who's already there, because that can unfairly advantage candidates who are similar to the current culture. You'll also want to find evidence in a candidate's application materials to support your scoring, and remembering throughout the process to acknowledge and move past your bias about a candidate's schooling, experience, or skills. This is a sample scoring rubric. I won't walk through this in depth here. The text is very small, and I would encourage you to pause here or maybe come back to this at a later time and think about it in the context of jobs that you're hiring at your own company. But main things to keep in mind here is setting a skill focus, which is the column highlighted in gray in the middle of your slide. So thinking about your open roles and what focuses are relevant for them. And then describing to the left how you would rate the candidate against each of those skills, and then how you would qualify a low score, a medium score, and a high score. And now you are ready to interview some folks. What can you do to make the interview process as equitable as possible? Here are some good places to start. You can use that rubric, right, to score candidates' interviews, assessing their aptitude for the job. You can ask standard, fair questions to all candidates that avoid bias and discrimination. You can ask behavioral questions that assess knowledge and skills rather than hypotheticals. And throughout it all, be honest about your organization work culture regarding equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm sure we've all attended job interviews where we've been asked the dreaded situational questions, what would you do in this type of situation? Turns out those are not entirely equitable types of questions. They're rooted in the hypothetical, and they don't provide an entirely fair assessment of knowledge and skills. Experience questions are typically the preferred type of interview questions that create the most equitable experience. These might look like, name a time when you demonstrated X. But I'll put an asterisk here that these are only equitable when they're done correctly. So an inequitable way to phrase these questions might be, describe a time when you had a disagreement with a coworker and how you resolved it. Well, some candidates might not have had a coworker before. This might be their first job. So a more equitable way to phrase that would be, name a time when you had a disagreement with someone, like a coworker or a classmate, and how you resolved it. Here's an example of an interview question you might ask someone if you are evaluating their aptitude for a communication type of competency. Come back to this slide post-presentation and think about competencies that are relevant to your jobs and how you might tailor your question to allow the candidate to speak to their past experience while also allowing you to get a good sense of who they are. All right, we've wrapped up some of my top equity tips in the hiring space. Zooming ahead then into the onboarding space, here's my plan. In this section of the training, we will cover onboarding checklists, expectation setting, staff connection touchpoints, DEI efforts, and check-in cadences. Starting then with onboarding checklists. Make a plan and write it down. Starting with a plan and having it ready prior to onboarding ensures your new hire will have an equitable onboarding experience. You want your candidate to arrive on their first day feeling prepared, comfortable, and set up for success. If you have a plan ready and perhaps have taken some steps to customize it to any unique needs they've identified or that their role requires, the better off that candidate will be. It's important to note that checklists can and should exist for managers too. This keeps everyone aligned and accountable for their responsibilities. And consider providing information to new hires in writing so that the candidates have the option to refer back to it if needed. Here is a sample onboarding checklist for employees that you can come back to, and a sample onboarding checklist for managers. And I'll again put a little asterisk here that these are not in-depth lists and deserve to be fleshed out in the context of your own open roles and your organization's needs. I've also included a sample first week schedule for a pretend new hire named Maddie. This outlines what Maddie will be doing, who they'll be meeting with, what time they'll be doing the activity, and any relevant location. This can help your new hire mentally prepare for the days to come, knowing when they might have a day full of training modules or when they'll need to be more chatty and prepared to socialize. It can help them influence if they need to pack a lunch that day or if they should plan to have money on them to go out to eat with the team. It can influence what they wear to the office. How can you customize a first week schedule like this to your organization? Now, all of these things are meant to help you set good expectations with your new hire. And I kind of feel uniquely qualified to talk about this because I'm an event planner. So as an event planner, a lot of my role involves getting people prepared. And I found that in 6 years of event planning, that people feel more comfortable when they know what's coming. So when I'm preparing my team to staff an event, I'll draw maps for them, I'll provide them with scheduling sheets, I'll tell them where to stand or when to place a phone call. You are the event planner for your new hire. What metaphorical maps can you draw to help them feel more at ease? This might look like the following: creating a list of workplace expectations and writing them down, developing a communication plan between new hires and their managers, explicitly stating how and when employee performance is evaluated, and avoiding unspoken expectations that are inherent in US work culture. And I feel like there's 2 bullet points specifically on this list that necessitate me going into them a little bit further. So first, to expound on the idea of common workplace expectations, that might be things like this, right? So for example, how do they need to dress in the office? Are jeans okay? Or are they a big no-no? What about on casual Fridays? Do you have casual Fridays? What if they were to wake up with a stomach flu? How can they call you? Do they need to call you or can they text you instead? Can it be 5 minutes before the workday is set to start, or would you prefer an hour, or would you prefer 2 hours, right? So all of these things, from the personal usage of their computer, how to request PTO, what their workplace conduct trainings look like, all of these are expectations that you need to set so that your new hire has a map. And if you think that some of these expectations are inherent, they are not. It is not equitable to assume that everybody knows the norms of office culture, especially US office culture. You might have a new hire who grew up in a different country, or for whom this is their very first job, or maybe who belongs to a different generation than you. So here are some unwritten norms that many of us grew up understanding and knowing. And these might not be common knowledge for the next person who gets hired into your office. These are things like showing up early and staying late, or working until the job is done. And if it's not done, take that work home. Things like how to make eye contact or what you can talk about when you're at work. If you have something pertaining to these areas that you want that person to know, set the expectation and have the conversation upfront. And as that new hire assimilates into your office, you'll want to start thinking about your office culture and how you can unify that new hire with members of your existing team. How can you build a connected team? Well, here are some ideas. You could start by creating opportunities for new hires to connect with existing staff, getting to know your employee through casual conversation, developing employee resource groups or other spaces for new hires to interact with their peers, and making it clear how a new hire's work fits into a larger organization. And to provide some actual concrete examples of how to do all of these things, you might consider the following: planning meet and greets, sharing organizational charts of who is who, social activities, right? Remember, above all, your new hires are people too, with lives and feelings and hobbies outside of work that can and will affect how they work for you in the future. We're social creatures, and connection makes us feel good. So I wanted to talk specifically about one-on-one conversations and how you can explore and initiate casual conversation with your new hires, remembering the whole time that casual conversation should always be a welcome thing in the workplace. Now, you don't need to talk about everything, right? There are some boundaries that you might want to set on certain topics, but letting your new hire know that you care about what's going on with their life will help you create a more connected team. As a personal anecdote here, I once had a manager who never asked me about my personal life, and as a result, I never felt comfortable telling them that for the entire time I worked for them, they never pronounced my name correctly. My name is Leah, and my manager pronounced it Leia. It's actually one of the reasons that I quit that job. I think most people like letting other people in and having opportunities to share their personal life. And when you have a bond and have created a connection like that, it can make having some difficult conversations later on down the line a lot easier. I'll add too that having a personal connection between a hire and a manager is especially important for Gen Z, who really need that personal interaction to feel fulfilled. And one other thing to keep in mind for Gen Z hires is the idea of the mission. Understanding the mission helps employees see the big picture. So as examples of how you can establish this, you could invite executives to share career advice or talk about the organizational mission with employees. You can invite employees to attend meetings about projects related to theirs that they're not necessarily involved in, or even offer a training session on something that your employee wants to learn. All of these things devoted to the idea of connecting the new hire with the team, the unit, the division, and the greater organization at large. Now, this is a webinar on equity, so I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about diversity and equity initiatives in the workplace, right? DEI. But I also understand that not all of you listening in to this webinar today are equal. Some of you might be brand new to introducing DEI initiatives to your organization, and some of you are going to be looking for ways to capitalize off of what you've already built. So for those of you who understand that there's work to be done in your organization, here's how you can start creating space for DEI initiatives. You can inform new hires of where your organization is at when it comes to DEI work, whether that's in the job description or throughout the interview process or as they're onboarding, or all three. You could provide opportunities for new hires to participate in this work as early as possible. You can be open to new ideas about your DEI work and create robust feedback mechanisms, and all the while acknowledging that this is, again, an ongoing effort that takes resources, energy, and time. So whether this is all new to you or you're looking for ways to advance your work, here are some examples of work you could be doing, all of which relate to DEI initiatives. And this is just one small list of 5 things. The DEI space is boundless, and like I said on the last slide, it's ongoing. But it's an important commitment to keep underrepresented minorities top of mind. Consider constructing a diversity statement, hosting resource groups or trainings, or conducting different types of analyses on your own company to hold yourself accountable to this work. And remember that if you've done your job correctly, you'll be surrounded by a bunch of people who have different voices, backgrounds, and needs than you. So listen to them. Develop systems that allow employees to be safe and honest about their experiences and recommendations. Allow them to provide anonymous feedback if they choose. Allow them to understand how their feedback will be reviewed, understood, and acted upon. And remind them that the system is not designed to be punitive, but it's designed to be constructive. Remember, eliciting feedback from your employees about their experience leads to improved systems and deeper investment at work. And as one final note here on onboarding, I would encourage you to start and continue the process of checking in. And it sort of goes along with my last slide on feedback loops and the importance of having them. So remember that this might look different for everyone. Remember my cartoon on equity from earlier? Different people need different size boxes to see over the fence. So maybe your check-in meetings are 10 minutes long at the beginning of the day. Maybe they're weekly. But as time goes on and your new hire becomes more comfortable, maybe these meetings happen less frequently. No matter what, revisit expectations and needs and adjust. And get comfortable admitting that you don't know it all. Neither does your new hire. You both get to grow with each other. So be open to giving and receiving feedback on performance thus far. Encourage questions and confirm clarity. Check-in loops allow you to get creative about problem solving, asking questions, and learning together. The final portion of this webinar covers retention. And as I've stated several times today, it's an ongoing process and it demands ongoing time and attention and effort and resources. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to retaining 100% of your employees. But I do have 3 slides on company culture, growth, and goals that can help you improve and maintain your retention rates. Starting with assessing company culture. Now, your company culture is built by the people who work there, point blank. So when assessing your culture, look at your people with a critical eye and how they're working alongside each other, how they're socializing, and how they're making decisions. Who is over or underrepresented at the various management levels of your organization? You might consider looking for ways that existing company norms could disadvantage certain populations of people. So for example, can the people with children attend the decisions that are made during post-work happy hours? Are you having water cooler chats in the morning that disadvantage the people with longer commutes and come in later to work? And what about social dynamics? Who typically has a propensity for speaking up? Who typically has a propensity for not speaking up? And if you're removed from all of this, it's easy. Enlist the help of your employees. Go back to that feedback loop. Have you instilled it? Are you maintaining it? Encourage folks to speak up. As another point of consideration when it comes to retention, your employees will feel safer and more confident in their job when they're able to be open with their managers about their long-term goals. So if you're a manager, get comfortable asking. Ask yourself first, what's your hope for your employees in 3 to 5 years' time in their job? Are there opportunities to move up in your organization for them to take on new roles and responsibilities? Do you even know what your employees' long-term goals look like? Are you able to help them meet them? Do your employees feel comfortable sharing their goals? And once you've answered these questions yourself, ask your employees too. Take the opportunity to align yourself with their wants and needs. Don't make assumptions about what somebody else wants their future to look like. Again, think equitably here. Creating the space for these types of conversations ensures you're constantly able to tweak your communication and working style to adhere to the communication and working style of your employees. And finally, always be thinking about growth. Stagnancy destroys retention rates. Growth opportunities at your company might be traditional, like promotional paths to leadership roles, but they also might look like things on this list, things like onboarding and on-the-job training, job shadowing, coaching and mentorship opportunities, especially peer mentorship opportunities, industry conferences, after or before hours networking options, cross-training with other parts of the organization, and knowledge sharing and collaborative vision planning. And if you don't know how your employees want to grow, as I've said several times today, just ask. Giving your employees the opportunity to grow increases their confidence in their jobs, in their organization to take care of them, and ultimately in themselves. Remember that creating equity is an ongoing process, but with all of these things, like time and resource and energy in mind, you do your part to equip everybody with the right size box that they need to be able to see over the fence and create a workplace environment that champions success for all. Again, my name is Leah Bothwell, and you can reach me via cicevents@uw.edu or leahkb@uw.edu. Have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are, and thank you so much for joining into Success for All today. Happy recruiting and take care.